There'll be a chance to look at the boards afterwards. If you can let me now. Right. Okay, you're all very welcome, Glen. It's a special afternoon, as you'll see from the photographs we're going to be looking at. I'd like to say some thank yous first of all. Hamilton Thompson, who can't be here, has donated, not donated, that would be nice. He has allowed us the use of the album from which many of these photographs have been taken. Hamilton's not able to travel himself, but I have the album with me and we'll be able to look at it later, but I didn't, but no handling, please. So thank you to Hamilton. Also thank you to Noreen Muldowney. Are you here, Noreen? No. All right. Noreen Muldowney and the Corcoran Ullen Arranmore Chiranta has funded this event. So the beautiful boards that have been done here, the panels and the presentations, photographs. So thank you very much to the cooperative. I'd also like to welcome, Sean's going to do a formal welcome to Charles Lone and his family are here, who are descendants of the Sinclair family who spent their holidays here in 1889 and recorded Arranmore in fantastic detail, great clarity. So nice to see you again, Charles. And any difficult questions, Sean's going to bounce them to you. Identification. And can I introduce Seán Boner, who's very well known on Arranmore. Seán Boner, his father was Paddy Manian, who was the teacher here in Abbott. He's well known as a local historian. This year, and I think probably next year, but he's not going to agree to it, he's the president of the Donegal Historical Society. And I think it's great that he's actually, with his Arranmore knowledge, is able to take us through these photographs. I'll put the album on display afterwards, and over to you, Seán.
You're all very welcome here to the Glen. 10 years ago, Patrick and a man called Eddie Ward, he's Eddie Argyll, his mother was from Hullawadi, were going up to Seán Mills to see photographs that a woman there, Celia Ferguson, had. Now she was herdsman before she got married, and they had a house out on the islands as you come in from Burton Port. So I went up with them, and it was 11 o'clock in the day, and she showed us the albums. They were stacked up, the albums. There was thousands of photographs. And so about 10 o'clock at night, my wife rang and she said, "Where are you?" And I said, "I'm in Seán Mills." And she's, "God, that poor woman. Get out of there. You have no right to do that." So we saw that. Now, R.I.C, some of the herdsman photographs are in this presentation today. They stayed here in 1947 in the Glen Hotel here, and they took some photographs, including a photograph of Jack the Glen that was taken out on the lawn. You'll see it later. Now, arising from meeting Celia Ferguson 10 years ago, we then were told that a family who were descended from the Sinclairs, who had a house in Strabane, they also had photographs. Charles Lone is their descendant, and that, you could say, is the main part of this presentation. The Sinclairs had a house in Holly Hill, Strabane. Let's see if we can get the photograph of the house. But they also had an estate of land at a place called Bonnie Glen outside Edinburgh. And they came here on a number of occasions, but they came here in 1889 And they came again sometime between 1903 and 1908. And the way I know it's after 1903, there's a photograph of the train that opened in March 1903. And there's also a photograph taken at Legara Pier where the National School was not in the photograph, and it was built in 1908. Now, they may have been here on other occasions. And then their daughter, Everina Maxwell, first she rented Inishku House, which is the Coastguard station as you come through the black hole on your right there. And then she bought it off the Cunningham estate. Now, that would have brought them back again because their daughter was living here. 1889 is a period of tension in Ireland. The Land League has been formed 10 years earlier, and you have agitation by tenants. Almost the entire country is tenanted, and there's friction between the landlords and the tenants. To make matters worse, there's an economic decline, and that combined with 3 or 4 years of very bad weather put the entire country under a lot of pressure. Now, 1889 is the incident where Inspector Martin was killed when he's trying to arrest Father McFadden in Derrybeg. And there's a photograph of Father McFadden in the collection with a short note about what he had said. He said, "I am the law in Gweedore." And this picture of him as well outside the church in Gweedore. That's the old, obviously. So that's the sort of background to this. It's a time of turmoil. Now, that's Father McFadden. He's in this collection. He's a stern man, and he's often described as authoritarian. He bosses people a lot, and he also has an extraordinary attention to detail. If you see his documents, and he's more or less in charge of the Land League here in Donegal at that stage. And that's him outside Derrybeg Chapel. And this was the chapel where the river flooded and drowned, I don't know, 8 or 9 of them in the early 80s. This is the drain that wasn't adequate to take the flood. It was flash flood in the summertime, and you know, these flash floods probably only come every 100 years. You'll see there's a boat in it. The first lifeboat in Arranmore is called the Vandalure. And the reason why it's called the Vandalure is because the Vandalure, the price of the boat was donated by a Reverend Vandalure. He lived in County Meath. His family lived in County Clare. They were his cousins, and they had a special notoriety among landlords. Now, they lived between Clare and England, and in the previous summer, they had tried to evict their tenants. Now, they had a new weapon, which was a battering ram with a steel head on it, and it was very effective. They knocked 22 houses in about 14 days. But the only problem was that the Land League were very well organised, and they had a man from New York who was Irish American. He'd been born in Canada in 1848. His family had left during the Great Famine. And he was there just to organise the taking photographs. And he didn't take them personally. He had 2 photographers, one from Limerick and one from Clare. And they took a collection of photographs. Now, these photographs are the Vandalure eviction photographs. He didn't present them to the press until quite late in the day. The evictions went on for 14 days, and I think it was day 12 when he presented his photographs, and he had all his photographs ready, and they had a devastating effect on the landlord, Vandeleur, and he had to negotiate with the tenants and let them back in because there was public outrage in England when they saw houses being knocked. And this was the sort of photographs they took. But they took a lot of them, and they're very well taken. Now, they're classed as Lawrence collection, but that's only because Lawrence distributed them. Lawrence didn't take them. Lawrence and Trench were well-known photographers in Dublin. But the Vandeleur was the first lifeboat in Arranmore. Now, this is a breakdown of the Sinclair family who spent the summer here in 1889. It's Mr. and Mrs. Sinclair, James Montgomery Sinclair, his wife Mary Everina Sinclair. The son then is William Hugh Montgomery. The daughters are Everina and Rosabella, and they have relations as well, possibly cousins. And it gets covered in the newspapers that August in 1889. I think it's a bit like it's sort of Airbnb, but it comes with staff. The staff of the Glen are kept on while the visitors are here. And the Charlies, who were the landlords here, have moved out for a few weeks to rent to the Sinclairs. Now, they may also have swapped with the Sinclairs. The Sinclairs had a house in Bonnie Glen. Inver is a very good salmon river, and for that reason, they may have wanted to go up there. It's outside Donegal town. That's Holly Hill near Strabane. It seems to be about late 18th century, early 19th century building, and it has similarities with other buildings in the northern counties. That's just a cropped up close of it. I went there to meet Hamilton Thompson, who's the owner and who had the album, and he showed us around and showed us the house. Basically, it's a big house, but I was surprised. I was looking at his books, and I was surprised to find that Donegal Historical Annual was among them. So that was a help, you know. This is Bonnie Glen, and the Sinclairs would have gone there. Now, Bonnie Glen doesn't exist. It was burnt down during the Troubles by IRA, Irish Volunteers or whatever, and this is a small waterfall that's on it, but it's quite well known here in Donegal by anglers because it's a good place to fish, and usually there's somebody fishing at the waterfall in Bonnie Glen. We don't know where the bear came from, but he visited Bonnie Glen about 1900s. I take it this man is his minder, and I hope he survived the bear. You know, this was a map they did out at the beginning of the album, and you can see there's strange things coming. Some of them seem to have come by sea from Inver. This is Inver, which is west of Killybegs, and they come up by sea to Loughgarrow, and then they go back by sea, and others come. Now, this is the wagonette, they call it, that brought them here. It's a fairly sturdy looking structure, and this is the owner. Now, he's a Gallagher man. There was a sort of hackney service that were well known in the county in Portneuf. There was about a dozen families that were in the transport business in the same way that families now, you know, Boyce's buses or McGinley's buses or whatever, they were in the business. Sweeney's and Dunlow were big into transporting goods and people. So he may be the man in question. He's well kitted out anyway for all weathers. And I don't know who the young fella is, whether he's his son or whether he's one of the passengers. This is the boat that brought them to Arranmore, and it's Donny's boat. And it's a yawl. It's not a particularly pretty yawl. I've seen boats that looked a bit better than this one, but it's a lump of a boat basically. And he took them to Arranmore. He also took them down to the cliffs, and you'll see later a number of photographs were taken down there. I think you call that a lug sail, is that right? It's when you don't have any jib. But now, this is Donny in the middle, Dan Ward, presumably his son, Donny. Mary Everina Sinclair. She's Mrs. Sinclair that comes here to the Glen. There's Akai, a black child, and there's Rosabella Sinclair, who's Mary Everina Sinclair's youngest child. Now this is taken outside the Glen, and the Glen is covered in ivy in 1889. I came here first in 1963. There was no ivy on any part of the building that I can remember, and I've asked other people, they don't remember ivy being on the building, but it was at that stage in 1889. That's Mrs. Sinclair, and that's Everina Maxwell, her daughter, and that's her son, I think he's Walter, and this is Rosabelle, the youngest child. This is the black child. It's not clear. He's quite young. He's probably under 7 anyway. I don't know the story behind his involvement. This is the master, Mr. Sinclair. I don't think that photograph's taken here. It may be taken in Strabane or Bonnie Glen. And that's the same photograph. And he's carrying a shotgun. Okay, so Glen was originally built about 1850. The estate, that is Arranmore, in Esquerra, and a number of small islands, was bought in 1848 by John Stoop Charlie. The Charlies go back in Belfast to about 1700, when a Ralph Charlie came from Lancashire. They built the town of Charlie in Lancashire and were prominent there. They opposed Oliver Cromwell, and that was the beginning of the end of their power, as it were, although they didn't. They continued to live there after that. When the Charlies left it, then it was occupied by the priest, Father Dominic Canning. Now, I don't know if he was occupying it under a soft lease from the Charlies, or whether he was just there on a license for a number of years. He had been, or the other, not him personally, but the priest had been in the building that owned 2 houses in Fallagowan that are owned by Macaulay's and Costellas. Thomas Costellas, Kate Costella, that house, and then Francine Macaulay's house beside it. In one of those houses, Charlie had put the priest when the first priest came to the island. But then when the Charlies left here, John Stoop Charlie was an industrialist. He owned a linen mill. He had inherited a linen mill from the Stoop family, who were large linen manufacturers in Belfast. They owned a mill in what's called the Falls Road, Lower Falls, and that was where their money had come from originally. Now, he was also a solicitor, but I don't think he practiced. He was more of a banker than a solicitor. Okay, so after Dominic Canning, Father Canning's time, the building then and the land immediately around this house down to the ferry port was sold to a Captain Maud from Dublin, and the Maud family then used it as a holiday home until it was bought in the early 20s by Jack Phil Boyle of Scrake Choke and his wife Hannah Rue Macaulay from Offord, and they then became Jack and Hannah de Glen. And after Jack and Hannah's time, Jack died in 1963. I'm not sure Hannah what date it was. The hotel was owned by their son Philly and his wife Mary, who's with us. I'm glad to say that you come here and see this. And it's now owned by Philip and his wife Anne Marie. So you could say that although this house has been here since 1850, there's really only been 3 families and a priest involved in it, and one family is over 3 generations now. Okay, so this is the Glen in 1889. It's covered in ivy. This part here, I'd often heard that there was a sun porch on the Glen, right? But as you can see, there's only one window, so it's rather light to describe it as a sun porch. But this structure was on the Forest Monarch, a large, very large sailing vessel that ran up on the back of an Esquerra in 1848. And the vessel was laden with timber from Canada, and they had to refloat the vessel. They had to take the timber off her and anything else that they could shift. And one of the things that they took off her was this building here. Now, I don't know. On a ship, they usually have a room to imprison people, a doghouse. That's the origin of the word doghouse. It might have been a doghouse. It's too small to be part of the bridge. But it was the oldest part of the Glen. Now, this here is, I think it was down on the other side of the path, the flagpole, is that right?
Left of the lawn.
Yeah, that's one. And was it there? And yeah. You see, you know the way it is, when somebody says to you, well, there was a flagpole, then I think, yeah, I think I remember that. And the flag on it is the N sign, you know, that's the Royal Navy flag. It's only supposed to go on ships, but they obviously got it and put it there. Now, this building up here it was called the Kirk. Kirk is the word for a Presbyterian church, but the Charlies were not Presbyterians, they were Church of Ireland. But in West Donegal, because there are no Presbyterian churches, they call the churches of the Church of Ireland Kirks, okay? And it was made of corrugated iron, which was the great material of that time. They thought it could be used for everything. And you can see that there's a bell on the top of it. Now, that bell was in Nearly Fells in the 60s. Now, I don't know what became of it subsequently. The rest of the building is quite ornate, the church. It's got, a adornments on the eaves. Now, this is a sort of tower feature. It was built. The whole thing was built in 1875. Now, Stupid Charlie died in 1875, but I'd say he arranged it before he died. Now, the building itself, you can see that there's a door much further to the north than is now the case. That door has been replaced by a wide window, and you'll see it on later photographs of the glen. And there was also a double building that looks like the glen was built and then they extended it, but that's not possibly true, because they had at that stage they had a practice of building double buildings. It looks like you took a house and it starts with an extension. Now, the woman who lived here when John Stupid Charlie had it, his wife, Mary Foster, she lived in Rushing Lodge when she was a child. That's where her parents lived. And it's one of these double buildings. So it may have been like that from the day it was built. That's the flagpole and the ensign. And that's the door. And as you can see, it's quite an ornate sort of opening, recessed by 2 feet or so. And this is the cooks who were working in the glen. As I say, I think they came with the renting. You rented the house. It came with staff. Now, this woman is Ellen Gallagher. I don't know who she is, but I think she's Nell, the woman they called Nell Gallagher. They had the house beside Fullban's pub on the pier side. They were smithies. And the obvious thing is, well, there weren't many horses in here, so what did they make their money at? They made anchors. So it was a very handy place for making anchors, because you could come in, anyone who had a boat could easily come in. This is Jimmy McHugh. I don't know who he is, but he's obviously there's only one McHugh family here, and he's their ancestor, he has to be. Now, this is the lifeboat shed. The boathouse, they used to call it, Chawaj, and Connor Ward, Packy Ward, lived there now. This house here is the O'Donnell house, Condy Cook's grandfather. And we'll see their picture later. He's a man, they call him Condy Rua. And this then is Early's pub now. It's the Glen here in the back, the ensign, and then the church up behind it. Now, I thought this was Frank Ward's. Noreen, the Glen cast doubt on that, so I don't know. There may be 2 houses there, and that there's only one in it now. I don't know. That's the same location as it is today. Now, this is the boathouse, and I think this was the slip. I don't think it's this one here. This one may have been built later. This is the pier, and it only goes down to where the bow of the trawler is. This other part, and one of the things that this pier did was that it pushed the post office is about here. They had a problem with flooding at high tide and a gale, and then when the pier was built, that pushed push the water further over. These are new buildings. You'll see this is Sheila Vicky, Hugh Campbell's mother's house, and you'll see it's in later photographs as well. That's the boathouse. The boathouse started there. That's where the RNLI were, and then they moved to Afford. And after they moved to Afford, Hugh Ruo O'Donnell, who lived where Killeen's pub is now, he was the coxswain of the lifeboat, and he bought that building, and his daughter Annie Hudie had it afterwards. There was then a chalet built, and then that was bought by the county council, eventually knocked to widen the road. So it's changed, but in some ways there's 4 or 5 houses there that were always there in 1889. That's Nearly Phil's house. I would say it's taken from the road above the glen. Now this is the O'Donnell house, Cundy Rua's house. He's Cundy Cook's grandfather, and his wife is she's Boyle. She's Biddy Neil. What's the name? But she's a sister of Phil Tack, who you'll see later. When the Sinclairs come back, he's in the photographs a lot, and I think it's because they were using him to do boat trips to places like Owie or Portneuf or whatever. This here is described in the album as a hand cart, and it was used to take the luggage up to the glen. Presumably this is the young fella who was in charge of the cart, and they're just posing for the photograph. Okay, Everina Maxwell, when she had the Coastguard station, she was friendly with a Belfast painter, and he painted a number of scenes. Now, this is above the glen, but he's moved the houses about a bit, as you can see. You can see the glen is the same place, all right, but this is R.I.C pub, and it's much further down. But he used to do that, so his paintings aren't 100% accurate in terms of coast or anything. This rock here, he's added this in for balance. There is a rock near to Carrickleback, but it's not that rock. And he then sold this painting as Dogs Bay in Connemara, which is a famous strand in Connemara. But you know, he's a professional painter, so he has to take business as it. But I don't know how he got away with, like, Dogs Bay in Connemara is dead flat. I don't know how he got away with selling it as Dogs Bay. Now that painting he painted that. He's very good on low-lying coastline, you know, and a lot of his paintings have that. Where was this? I would think it's probably Arranmore and Pullawaddy, because it's on very high ground relative to everywhere else. So I think now he also painted, which is quite important in terms of history. He painted people doing particular work. These people are cutting kelp, right? And what they do is they cut sea rods using this long pole. And then when they have the sea rods cut, they put them into the boat. They take them ashore, they bundle them, they dry them, they stack them as though they're sticks. And when they're dry, then they chop them up in buildings that are very like factories. There's one there in the Black Hole in Rutland, the Union Store. It was a kelp factory. And kelp is really valuable in the middle of the 19th century. Now, as time goes on, it becomes less valuable. It's used to make iodine, but iodine substitutes are got in its place, and I don't think it has much use now. Now this is again, you can see the low-lying coastline. This is people filling a boat with stooks of corn to take out for animals, probably for bedding or for thatching. That's the house he lived in Rutland. It was timber frame, and it no longer exists, nor is there any trace of it at all. It probably had an asbestos roof, if you can look at the roof there. So that's not a great structure. It's a chalet, I suppose you would describe it as. It's timber. And that's back to the glen. And you see the door now, this becomes a window as time goes on. And this door then is the door that's now used. This photograph didn't come from the Sinclair album. We had that photograph at home. But if you look at the photograph, some of the people in the photograph are the same as the people in the Sinclair photographs, in particular this man here. I think that was taken the same day as the later regatta photographs. This man is one of the Sinclairs, as is the third man. This man here is Phil Tack, so he would have been their boatman. This man here is Phil Moore, who would have been Jack de Glen's father. And this man here is Charlie Liam, who was my great-grandfather. And this woman here is Sheila Beg, who's Phil Moore's sister. I think these two women are part of the Sinclair party, and this here is my grandfather, and this is Jack Byrne. They were mates, as it were. They were probably 13 or so. He was born in 1895. So it was 1908, there'd be 12 or 13. They then went on Irish Lights together. So they were working together for 10 years on the Irish Lights vessel. This man here is Jack Neil John D. Boyle. He was the man who had the contract for taking out the post. So you could say although he's not of the post office, he is closely involved with them in that he goes to the post office every day, and they would have met him there. Now, the post office was used as a lodging house before the Glen was opened as a hotel. And a number of people stayed there. Padre O'Donnell, the writer, stayed there for 2 years. Maud Gawn McBride stayed there in the early 20s. So I think that's how it ends up that we have that photograph now. We know it's before 1908 because there's no school. The school was built in 1908. That's Paddy Wirish's house, but the school doesn't exist. So it has to be before 1908. Now, Jack Neil John, we'll be looking at regatta photographs later. But Jack, because he was in and out to Port, was on this side of the island anyway, considered an authority on sailing because he had a lot of practice, But one of the stories they told about him was that he had the reputation of being very straight and honest and honourable. But there was one thing that they used to tell about him that was a bit near the edge. He was in a race, himself and Captain John of Victor, and they were going down through the last leg of the race, down around Mala Rock. And Jack was going to get beaten because he was trailing Captain O'Donnell's boat, and they were going to round Mala before him and sail back to Libgarrow. But Mala is made up of 2 rocks, and he sailed through the gap to win the race. Now, some people blamed his brother Neely, who was more capable of shortcuts than Jack. He said it wasn't like what Jack would do, but he did it anyway. And then, of course, they came back to the Glen, and there was a row here about every race that was ever sailed in here. It's because it's like a motor accident. The person behind doesn't see the accident the same way as the person in front, you know, so boats are a bit like that. Okay, when Captain Maud had the Glen, he introduced rainbow trout to Lough County. This is the biggest of the Arranmore lakes. It's called Lough Shore on the Ordnance Survey, and nobody really knows why that is the case. And people say it might be Lough Hare, you know, that it's the eastern lake, but the other lakes are pretty eastern as well. But anyway, he brought in rainbow trout. They were reared in Dunlow, a place called Tuberkeen that had there was a hatchery there. And there's only 3 places in Ireland where rainbow trout will self-generate, and this lake is one of them. The other 2 lakes are Lough Ban in Castle Pollard, and the other one is Lough Naleba in Sligo. Why they self-generate there, I don't know. I asked a man who was head of the Board of Conservators in Northern Ireland, who knows these lakes very well, why he thought that this lake would carry rainbow trout, because there's no stream coming into it. There is a stream going out of it, and it's acidic water. It doesn't have a lot of feeding. And he put it down to, when the water goes low there, you'll see there's flagstones in it, and the small fish could go in under the flagstones, and that would protect them till they grew, because the bigger fish would eat the smaller ones. The rainbow would eat themselves. They would have the chance. But I don't think anybody else ever put a boat on it. But this boat was on it in Captain Maud's time. Jack the Glen, in one of the newspapers, said that the largest trout ever caught on that lake was 3.5 pounds, which is quite good fish. Rainbow fight a lot, you know, they're gamey fish, so that if somebody's catching a 2-pound rainbow, they think it's like a 6-pound fish, whereas you could have a 7-pound brown trout and he's half sleeping, and you know, he does a bit up any struggle. That's the post office. If they stayed in the post office, my great-grandparents lived there. This was the first building, and then in the 1890s they extended it to what it is there. This photograph was taken from the street of the Burn House on the Passage or High Street in Upper Libgarrow, and they took this photograph of the Elphinoris, which was a Greek ship, and that's why the Arranmore people called it the Greek. And it hit a rock down here called the Blind Rock, and they tried to beach her on the strand, but they couldn't bring her around fast enough, and she ended up there. And eventually, she sank into the sand, and there's very little of her left now. But divers would would go down on her occasionally. She broke her back. You know, she's in two parts now, I understand. But I remember asking Phil Byrne, did he remember the Greek coming in? And he did, of course. And he said that his father, Johnny Ban, was sitting at the table in Burns. Now, you couldn't actually see down the bay from where he was. And somebody said there's a ship coming up between Calf Island and Mala. And the next thing is they heard the thump. And he turned to his wife and he said, "Well, she's hit the blind rock." And because that was the only rock there is between Mala and Calf Island of inside there anyway. Now he got a job on her as a security man, and she had a cargo of maize, and it was sold off in Arranmore and everywhere else as well around the area. So that photograph was taken by the herdsmans in 1947. The extension here to the building was corrugated iron originally. It may have come from the church, but nobody seems to know if that's the case. The church was corrugated iron and this building was corrugated iron. Now, Philly the Glen later built it with block. You see this window here. This is the door that was closed up. I think that's the dining room now, is it? Yeah. So that's one of the herdsman party. He's Martelli, and that's to his right is Jack the Glen. Again, this is pictured outside the door there, and this is Jack the Glen, and this is Hannah, his wife. I don't know who the other 4 people are.
Mary Sharkey. Hannah's sister.
Mary Sharkey, her husband. What is his name? Right, okay. She was a school teacher here, yeah. Yeah. Right, okay. A lot of school teachers stayed here, you know. My father stayed here. I don't know how long he was here. A year or two anyway, in the early 50s. This is Philly the Glen and Jack the Glen. They say on the island and in West Donegal generally, they say Jack, you know, rather than Jack. Like my granny was married to a Jack and she used to say Jack and everybody else was saying Jack, which I thought was very funny. But Jack the Glen, Jack is the name Seán or John or Shane or Sean or whatever. That was very common in West Donegal. And then there was another variation of it, Shenin. If the younger generation was also the same as the parent, they called that person Shenin. And then they went to school, the teachers started translating Shenin as Jack. And so within a few miles north of Arranmore, you had half a dozen Jacks. You had Jack Byrne, you had Jack the Glen, you had Jack O'Hara. You know, it was a very common name. So this is that'll be taken, I would say, in the early 50s. I don't know who the other people are. Do you know who they are, Mary?
Who?
These people here.
I don't know.
No, the visitors. Yeah. Yeah, this is taken on Jack the Glen's boat as well. That's Philly, his son, in the background. And this man is an Englishman called Bolt, right, who went around the island, it seems, with a hammer in his hand because he was a geologist and he was taking samples of rocks and so on. This lady here is Mrs. Shields. They own the Milford Bakery in Milford, and that's her husband. And that's Mrs. Shields' daughter. And that's Mrs. Shields here. I don't know who this person here is, you can't see. And this is my Aunt Frances. She was friendly with Mary Shields. That's the Glen quite recently, probably 10 years ago. Hasn't changed much since the building we started off with, except that this, what was a door, is now a window, and there's been an extension onto it. Now, there's also an extension on this side where we are. Okay, so this is Arranmore lifeboat station. That's the station in Loughgarra. Built at a cost of £420, 1883. Quite a lot of money, £420 in 1883. And that's the picture. The Vandeleur, she was brought into service 83, 84. Reverend Richard Vandeleur paid for the first lifeboat in Arranmore in memory of his son, Major Thomas Burton Vandeleur, who was killed in the Second Afghan War in 1880. So that's the only photograph of the Vandeleur that I'm aware of. I've never seen another photograph of it. She's not the prettiest of boats. She's a bit of a tub, but you know. This is La Totitam, paid for from a legacy by Miss Brooks, according to or in the live records. But at this stage, you can see they're in Afford. They're no longer in Loughgarra, and they're, what do you call those skateboards that you put out in front of a boat? Now, this photograph is high quality photograph. It can be enlarged, and you can sort of see what the different men are doing. This man here has got a hook, and his job is to level the boat when she's lifted up, to pull her either way, or which I think is interesting. You can see when you enlarge it, you can see he's holding an iron bar with a neck on it, and he's using that to pull the boat this way or push it that way. Now this lady over here is she's obviously finding the Afford sun a bit too bright for her, and or it might be rain she's dealing with, I don't know. That's the same boat being lowered down, Afford's there in the background. So that boat came in 1902, so therefore those photographs are different to the 1889 photographs. They came later. That is La Totitam as well, and that was one of our own photographs. It didn't come out very well. The camera wasn't good enough. The man in the bow of the boat was my grandfather, and that was taken before 1913. Because 1913 he went to work on Irish Lights. He was no longer on the lifeboat service. There was another boat out here, and Hannah Charlie, who is sister, she eventually went to Canada and married one of the McConaughleys. That would be where Philip Macaulay lives now, and yourself. That was where that family lived. And she went out, I think it's Alberta she went to. She wrote to my mother, it seems, for years and years after she went, and she was generally very helpful to people from the islands at the time. Getting into America was considered was a big plus, and Irish people then were subjected to a medical, but what she did in the case of the Arranmore people, anyone who failed the medical were taken out to Canada, and they spent a few weeks with her, and then they went across the border. There was any crossing as such. It was just out in the middle of nowhere. So a number of people who had defective toes or whatever went in through Canada to America. This is the Arranmore lifeboat, the first motorboat at Alfred Pier on the day it arrives. I think it's 1925. The man here holding the rope, coiled rope, is Johnny Byrne. The man behind him is Conéman O'Donnell of Lebrana. He lived opposite the National School. And this man is John Winnie's father. And this man here is Tom's uncle. This man here is McGill. He was drowned at Alfred Pier in 1931. That's Barney McGill, his father. And this is Anton Ruas, Hudi Rua, that had Killeens, where Killeens is now. This man here is Neely Byrne of Upper Lipgarrow, and that's my grandfather of Lipgarrow Strand. Now, they're out doing trials the day the boat arrives, and this is my grandfather. This is Commander Upton. People in charge of the RNLI were mainly retired Royal Navy officers, and they used the term commander position. In this case, he is showing the crew how to raise the rudder. You can see the rudder is much higher than it would normally be. That's because he's pulled it out of the water. And Arranmore is written at the side of that. But that's the 1935 boat, the KTGS. That was the boat then that the Stalwick had involvement with the Stalwick. I don't know who these people are, but the man in the middle is my grandfather. That was taken in Alfred, I would say, before 1913, 1912. That's again the boat when she's at Burton Port the day she arrived. And this is a poor picture of Commander Upton, obviously. He was in charge of the lifeboats at the Dunkirk evacuation, and I mixed success. Some of them had no problems, and some of them it was too much for them. The problem with the lifeboats at that time is that their propellers were very far back under the boat, so if they went down on the beach, they had great difficulty dragging the boat off the beach. And two lifeboats had to be abandoned at the Dunkirk evacuation. This is a picture outside the boathouse, and it's from the Arranmore disaster. And in a nutshell, in November 1935, a boat carrying 20 people ran up on a rock at a place called Aileen. Aileen means in Irish a clutch. You have a big rock and then loads of small rocks. Clutch of ducklings, and the boat capsized, and only one person survived. Now, their bodies were brought in, mainly to Alfred, and laid out in the lifeboat shed there. That's a photograph taken inside the lifeboat station in Alfred during the Arranmore disaster period, November 35. They're saying the rosary, and that's why they're all gathered in the one place. And that's the boat, the offending boat that capsized. That's the lifeboat station in Alfred, taken in 1935. And you see there's 3 yawls or more outside the station. This photograph shows Magella O'Donnell, Daniel O'Donnell's wife. she was honorary secretary. Is Jimmy Early's here? Where is he? Yeah, what year was that, Jimmy?
2 years ago.
2 years ago, okay. Now, the last female honorary secretary of the lifeboat here was Everina Maxwell, she was one of the Sinclairs. That's Jimmy Early there, and Nora Flanagan, Nigella O'Donnell, John McHugh.
John McCafferty,
John McCafferty, I guess.
his daughter Erin,
Oh, it's daughter Erin, and who's this
and
here?
Sebastian Siebel.
Oh, right, okay, very good. Okay, so these are the photographs that were taken at the regatta in 1889. This is Lipgara Pier, and it's just a stump of a pier. As I said earlier, it was extended in 1928. That's another photograph of the same pier. And the boats are there in the background. Now, this was the Ross's Regatta, 1889, and we'll see some of the people that were involved in it. William Hammond was the landlord's agent in Burton Port. I don't know if he was much good as an agent, because the priest said when he was retiring that he never evicted anybody. So I don't know how that would work. But his son Harry Hammond was one of the people that came with Dr. Smith at the time. Dr. Smith got the typhus when he was taking out the Gallagher family from Ballantrae. Harry Hammond, John Sweeney from Dunlow, who was a medical officer, and Dr. McCarthy from Dunlow, who was the MD. Stella is Dr. Smith's boat. She won one of those races, but she also won the 1901 race in the Arranmore Regatta. This is 1889. And then there's other boats mentioned there. You can see some photographs of them later. Fusilier, and then he was keeping the cup. Now, you'll see the cup later, but I'm not sure that it's the same cup. I think it might be the 1901 cup rather than the 1889 one. It says 1991 on it, but he was probably dead at the time that the writing was put on the cup. In my own case, P. Rogers, he won the punt race. He's Pat Andy. The boat was Kincastle. He was from Kincastle. He was my granny's father. Dolly Pat Handy, she was. And you can see there, the boat builders. There's Hopkins and Portrush is one of the places where they're buying boats from, and they have great hopes, obviously, of that boat. Smith was challenged by Major Hamilton, the owner of the Star of the North, for a race around the way for £10. £10 is a lot. You'd probably multiply it by 200, so serious money. That's taken from Lipgara Strand as the race starts. Ardmore Pullawaddy is the hill there behind. Then you have Calf Island, Bowie Island, and then it's taken from the Strand. That's the Dolphin. That's one of the sailing boats that was mentioned in the race. This is during the race, and you can see this is the boat that's coming second, and they're probably rounding a buoy there. That or he's lost his way. He's going in a different direction to the one behind. This is the cup that's 1901. And this is Dr. Smith and his wife when they married in 1883. Now, Dr. Smith lived in a number of houses, including the one opposite Jimmy Johnny's pub there in Burton Port. but he also lived in Roisin Lodge that's no longer in existence. And on the inside of the shutters in Roisin Lodge, Danny McGrenner, who owned that building, later said to me that was written probably by a child, Stella Arranmore Regatta 1901. So this was the Burton Port. She was a steamer. She was owned by the Herdmans and the Hammonds, and it went to Derry and to Glasgow, occasionally to Liverpool, but not very often, mainly Glasgow. It was used as the sort of flagship in the 1901 regatta. It's mentioned in the reports on the regatta, and this was a tribute to John Herdsman from business people in the Rosses. He owned the factory that's there in the Black Hole. As you go out on your left, there was a large complex there, and he was one of the people behind it. The Royal Irish Constabulary, we got the name Royal after the Fenian Rising. Before that, they were just called Irish Constabulary. They had a police station in Pullawaddy, and that's a photograph of them. There was 4 of them, 7 altogether, 4, 3, 7. This is John Early. He remained on the island. There was 2 other policemen who remained on the island after the force left here, and that was Conley, who had that pub that Jerry Early has, and Daly had the pub that Paddy McHugh had. This is their yawl there in Pullawaddy on the Shingle. For cruising with their yawl, Royal Irish Constabulary stationed at Pullawaddy with their yawl for cruising among the islands in search of poaching, etc. That's the yawl again, and that's this man here is Reynolds, and this man here is Early. And that's those. It seems they had a lock-up as well, and the bars in the window are for the lock-up. And this young man. Now, that's a good photograph, and the Sinclairs took that. Now, you can enlarge that, and you can see that there's no royal in the crest. The crest must have been supplied before they were called the Royal Irish Constabulary. Now, this is Pullawaddy, and there's about 13 yawls there. Now, they would be the yawls, of course, from everywhere, nearly from middle of the island over, because it would be easier to get out north on this side by having the boat further north. This was the boathouse that the R.I.C. had. This was one of the first Coastguard stations on Arranmore Island. There had been Coastguard stations here going back to the Napoleonic period, back to 1790s. That one was the second last one, and it was owned by a man called Paddy Boyle, Paddy Tot, and it was referred to as Tots by the locals. I think this is Ned Foy's house. It may be the Boner house up on the upper road, I'm not sure about that. Foy was a policeman, and Ned Foy was a Gallagher from the island. And when he was a child, because Foy was the policeman, he got Foy as a nickname. Okay, they went sightseeing as well with Johnny Ward, and later with Bill Tack and Bill Boyle. That's Barracowan. I think that Stockham is called Stockamore. or Arranmore maybe. And this is Tor here, and that's the headland there. That's what the Jowl is one, which is the devil's whatever, and the other one is what the Joan, the demonic prick, as it were. I'm not sure which is which. I don't know. One is much nearer to the shore than the other. And that's the Stacan again, recently taken. Again, the two buds, whichever is which. And that's the lighthouse in the background there. Again, the Stacan. That's Barracowan, taken up beyond the lighthouse. That's taken over at the Green Island. And this is probably taken from the cliff. You can see the boat, the Sinclairs are in down at the sea. It's tiny. That's out from the north side as well. That photograph appears in the Sinclairs. It also appears in the Herdman photographs. I don't know where it is. It's not the obvious ones, but it's obviously at the back of Arranmore somewhere, unless it's in a way. Ways a lot of caves and crevices. That's the Sinclairs posing for a photograph down at the cliffs.
Okay.
Okay.
Go straight ahead, yeah?
Okay. There's the later photographs, there's a few dozen more here. We'll run through them quickly. No, that's the earlier one.
Sorry. Sorry. Change this thing. Where is it plugged in? I plugged it so. Plug it in the socket. That's right. Okay.
One of the things you'll notice about these photographs is that there's no photographs taken inside. I would say the camera just didn't cope with not having natural light.
Apologies, everyone. Oh, I effectively remember to thank Philip and Anne-Marie for the use of this room and for the use of the Glen. So we should do that. Nice. Just be a minute or so, just getting power back up again.
Does anybody, while we're trying to get this to work, does anybody have any questions about the photographs?
There's no information on the black trip or black guides.
Obviously Caribbean or African. A lot of mixed races. Yeah, yeah,
Lights out, close.
yeah.
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 Most of the woman you said was in the house now, wasn't those bombs were Angela. She was from Ireland. All right, so she's one of your own.
Yeah.
She's been married after that.
Yeah, she's married in Canada. I think she's Alberta.
And Rob.
Her husband.
Right. Fires spreading. Wildfire. I suppose it's not down to do. It's not worth it.
Just tell me when you.
Yeah. We're sorry for that interruption, but I was talking to my sister, she's an engineer, and she said to me that the reason why they were building these double buildings was that at that time they weren't able to span the roof. It was too long if you made it wider. You see, these are quite narrow buildings as well, and that's the same thinking. Now this is Phil Tack Boyle. He's nearly Phil's father, and Reverend Samuel Orr is he's the Church of Ireland rector in Mahari, but that's really done low. He had a row with a man called Paddy the Cope. Well, Paddy the Cope was poaching Mahari Lake, and I think Reverend Orr was right. The title of that lake would lie with the Church of Ireland at that stage. So when he disappeared, then the rumour machine got going that Paddy must have had some part in his disappearance. But it turned out anyway, then he was seen at, I think, Strabane railway station. He had made off with a young teacher that was in the school in Dunlow. So I assume they lived happily ever after, but Paddy the Cope never got into any bother over it. He's in a number of the photographs, and if you see the group photographs, because he's a tall man, you can sort of pick him out, Reverend Samuel Orr. I think this woman may be Everina. Is that right?
Possibly. It looks more like a mother, actually.
Is it? Okay. And
because Everina would have taken almost all of those photographs. There are a couple of few in, but she'd have actually taken almost all the photographs.
Yes. Well, the father is in none of these photographs except the one of himself. So he probably took the ones in Arranmore. This again is Phil Tack, nearly Phil's father, and he gets killed in the rail tragedy down at Oncarrow when it goes off, the train goes off the viaduct. This is Captain John of Easter. This may be Everina as well.
Spears, I think that one.
Miss Spears. This is Phil Tack, and this pretty horse is a mule or a jennet, I'm not sure which. It's not a donkey and it's not a horse, it's a cross of some sort. Again, he's in a lot of the photographs, and I think it's because he's their boatman. He's like Donny Ward was in the 1889 photographs. He has got a motorboat. He had the first motorboat in Arranmore, and his name locally is Phil Neil Nancy. But out in the mainland, his boat is there in the port a lot, and the children don't know. He's Phil to them, and then they start calling him Phil Tack because he's got a motor engine that makes a tack, 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 tack sound. Right? And it's easier for them to deal with then. So the adults then started calling him Phil Tack. Again, it's because of the engine he had. That's his motorboat down here. And I understand from Danny Nearly Phil that he had a later one, and I've seen a photograph of it. And he also called that one Boyle. So he transferred the plates, as it were, This is him here in the boat. I don't know whose boat this is. It is a goose tail stern on it. You see it there. This is the Maud boat, and later Jack the Glen and Philly's boat. This is White Wings. It's a sailing boat, and later an engine was put into it. And this here is Johnny Ban Byrne. Johnny Ban was the boatman for the Mauds, so that's why he's in charge of the boat. Now his uncle, Phil Moore, was the boatman for Charlie. So you can see that the jobs are getting passed on. This is after March 1903 because the train came to Burtonport 1903 for the first time, and that's the turning table. That's over by, the crab factory over there. I remember going out to Burtonport, and of course I spent a lot of time around the pier when I was a kid. And I went over here, and there was these funny things in the water, and I couldn't make out what they were. There were tadpoles. There was no frogs in Arranmore. I didn't know what a tadpole was. This is the viaduct, and this is the gap. There was a gap, there was a railing, but then there was a gap. And when the train was passing through, when it came to the gap, it blew off. Not completely, it hung, it was suspended, but it killed Phil Tack, and it killed his wife, and it killed 2 others. That's a recent photograph of the Moncarroll Viaduct. It's very easy to go to it. It's quite near the road, particularly on the northern side. It's not 400 yards from the road there down to the viaduct, and it is quite a spectacular structure by anyone's imagination. It's the turntable. I think this is probably going to go back now, is it? This is the hospital on Inishku. They're ruined now. All that's here is wallsteads, or ballaghy, as they say. No roof on them. There was a hospital there in the Coastguard time. And around about 1882, Coastguards, a number of them had typhus, and they thought it was a feverish condition, so it was better if they were outside. They were treating them in tents out here, and Dr. Spencer, who was the medical officer in Dunlow at the time, went into the tents and he got an awful stench, he said. And he himself contracted typhus and died within a few days. He's buried in the Church of Ireland graveyard in Dunlow. But what was interesting about him is that the doctor before him had died of typhus, and the doctor after him died of typhus. Foster was the doctor before. He's the brother-in-law of Stephen Charlie, and where's he, the nephew? No,
Mary's brother.
yeah, his brother-in-law, Mary Foster's brother. So he would have been here in this house as well, and he got typhus and died. And then his replacement got typhus and died, and then Dr. Smith got it. Now, there's no mention much of the two earlier doctors who died, but Dr. Smith wrote the book Hero of Donegal, and that kept his memory alive.
Let's go back. You missed that one, Sean.
Yeah. Sorry, I missed that one.
Yeah.
Now, this is Everina Maxwell outside a co-op that she established in Inishku, and it's a corrugated iron structure as well. You can see there's a cow there in it as well, black and white cow. That's the hospital. This is Ellen Swanish. I don't know who the Swanish family were, but there were a family on the mainland called Swanish. It's an unusual name around here. And she's in hospital in Inishku on the 11th of June 1891 after it was established. It was established 1891, and it's around that time. The photograph. Now, this was Inishku. This was the Coastguard station in Inishku, and it's been like that more or less since it was built in or around 1780. It's had a few uses since then, of course. It was a private house to start with, and then it was a coastguard with a hospital unit behind it, and then it was a holiday home, and it's now a holiday home again in that. Celia Ferguson is one of the owners of it. This was the factory that the herdsmans had, and Jimmy Johnny Public Inn in Burtonport now has turned it into a holiday home. In 1911, one of the civil service agencies carried out a health and safety inspection in that building, and they said that there was 150 women working in the building on 3 floors. You know, the 2 floors are fairly easy to see, but there was probably a 3rd floor here that has windows going the other way. This is Nancy's Rock. It's out in the middle of the black hole. It's probably named for a ship. It was a ship wrecked in Rutland in 1848 called the Nancy, and that's probably what gave that rock its name. That's the Coastguard station again, where Everina Maxwell lived. And after her time, what's their name? Vicky Kitties, they were O'Donnell's from Meekler. They owned it, and then it was sold to Bernard McGlinchey, who was from Letterkenny. He used it as a holiday home. But it's a big building by the standards of buildings that would have been built much later than 1780s. This is William Henry Bartlett, that he befriended Everina Maxwell when he was old at that stage. He was coming to the end of his career as a painter, but he used to stay with her in Coastguard station, and then presumably by way of part payment he gave presents of his paintings, because she had a lot of his paintings, and I saw them in Charles Loan's mother's house in Ballinmallard. I said to her, that's William Henry Bartlett, and she said, how did you recognize it? I said, I've seen a lot of them. So that's them towing a cow, and they still do that in Burtonport, to take cows out to the island. If you only want a cow, it's an easy enough way to take them out, and the cow will walk half the way. And some of the cows are so used to doing this that they go out themselves, so you don't really have to put a rope on them. This is a scene after a fair at Burtonport when Arranmore people are going back to the island. This is Meiji Byrne, Meiji Moore. She's not very Moore, but she was called Meiji Moore because she had a daughter, Meiji, as well. And this is Johnny Ban, her husband. And that's the crowd gathered with a view to go back. It may have been a fair in Burtonport, rather than coming from Dunlow. Or a fish. Was a fish held in Burtonport in the early 1900s. That's that building. Dr. Smith lived in that building for a while because I saw photographs that came from America, from the Smiths, and Granny's house was written on this building here. This is homespun regime, a complete suit of homespun. If you went up to McGee's now and asked for a suit like that, they would probably want €1,000 before they would start doing anything. He's got a dicky bow as well, and he's probably picked out because of his attire and the way he looks. That's Nairnman's after buying a horse in Dunlow because he's going to take him with him to Arran. This is the railway station because that's the fencing that was at the railway station. A few sheep. That again is Meiji Moore Burn, and this is the co-op in Inishco. Again, Meiji Moore. I don't know who the two older women are. And this is Donny Ward, the boatman, and his punt, not the yawl in the punt. This is the Chair Connell. This boat was skippered, captained by the Boyles of Rutland, Teagues they call them, Dennis John Teague.
The Manus is in behind.
Oh, is he?
Yeah.
Well,
Is it Teague Boyle? Is the skipper here?
Teague Bucking.
Yeah, Teague Bucking.
yeah. That boat was used to take trips to Derry and Glasgow. There was a succession of boats. Some of them were owned by the Boyles. Some of them they were skippering them for the Hammond, for the Cunningham estate, and this was one that Hammond owned. This one. When Dr. Smith died, he got typhus. And he got it in here, and he took the patients out to the mainland. But probably if he had rested, he would be okay. He went to Glasgow on this ship, or one of these ships. There was 3 or 4 of them altogether. And he then, instead of resting in Glasgow, he came back again, and like the combination of the typhus and the journey was definitely going to finish him. Whatever chance he had if he'd rested, That's Jack B. Yeats, man of Arranmore. Jack B. Yeats painted that at the end of Burtonport Pier. I remember Burtonport Pier when those cobblestones were on it. The cross here is still on it. The island, Arranmore, he made bigger in the background for dramatic effect. When Singh was putting on Riders to the Sea in London. He wanted, what's not brochure, what's the word for it? So they used this program. He wanted a program, so they called it Man from Inishmore, which has confused a lot of people since, including the National Library, because I saw them writing about it. They're saying that it was a scene in County Galway, but there's no doubt about it because the cross is still there, you know, the cross for tying the rope. You may also have seen the photographs that the Sinclairs took. Like, painters take shortcuts. You know, some people use mirrors, some people use photographs. But you may have got the idea from the guy who was wearing the homespun suit with the big hat, you know.
That's it, Sean.
Sinead,
Brilliant.
thank you very much. I was saying at the beginning, the person, he was